The wind slammed against the open door of the helicopter, rattling every metal joint. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots as I looked down. The ledge was narrow, jagged, and halfway swallowed by smoke. And right there, standing between the fire and the cliff, was a massive brown bear. His fur was scorched in patches, and he was roaring into the chaos, not out of anger, but desperation. The flames were closing in fast, and I knew he only had a few minutes left. The smell of burning pine filled the cockpit. From above, the valley looked like a scar of fire slicing through green hills. I caught a glimpse of the town below, roads twisting through smoke, sirens echoing faintly, people evacuating. Jordan, my pilot, kept us steady against the gusts. His knuckles were white on the controls. "We can't stay here long, Dylan," he shouted through the headset. "The downdraft's getting nasty." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the bear. There was no clear path for him to escape, just the cliff and the inferno. Every second the fire grew louder, feeding on the dry needles and shrubs. The air shimmered with heat. My heart was pounding, but my training took over. Assess, stay calm, plan. It all started a week ago. Back then, no one imagined the season would turn this deadly. It hadn't rained in over a month. The forest floor was crisp, the grass brittle underfoot. Every morning, the department issued new warnings: high wind, low humidity, red flag conditions. We all knew what that meant. One careless spark could light up the mountainside. That weekend, families had crowded the lookout point above the valley. It was a favorite spot, a wide rocky ledge with a view of the entire town. People came there for barbecues and photos, ignoring the faded "No open flames" signs. Someone must have lit a small fire for cooking. Maybe they thought they'd put it out. Maybe a gust carried an ember into the brush. Whatever it was, by evening, a thin column of smoke was already rising. The first call came into dispatch just before dusk. I was on rotation at the airbase when the alert popped up. At first, it sounded routine. A minor ground fire, the type we could handle with one truck and a water drop. But when the wind shifted, everything changed. The flames jumped across the ridge faster than the crew could chase them. By nightfall, the fire had already spread 2 miles uphill. Now, a week later, it had devoured half the valley. Entire slopes were blackened, trees collapsing one after another. We had been flying nonstop, dropping water, mapping hotspots, coordinating ground teams. But this was different. This was no longer about property or containment lines. It was about life, and it was staring right back at me from that ledge. "Fuel check," Jordan called. I heard the quick reply from the gauge. We had maybe 20 minutes before we had to pull back to refuel. The heat was rising. The rotors were straining. The bear took a step toward the edge, pawing at the rock as if searching for a way down. My chest tightened. If he panicked, it would be over in seconds. He'd fall, or the fire would take him. There was no middle ground. Over the radio, the dispatcher's voice broke through the static. "Air 1, be advised, the fire has reached the upper transmission line. You have less than 10 minutes before visibility drops completely." I looked at Jordan. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew what that meant. We were running out of time. I took one last look at the bear through the smoke, memorizing the way he stood there, trapped but still fighting. Then I grabbed my gear and clipped into the harness. If we were going to save him, it had to be now. Yesterday started in a quiet room full of screens. I was on shift at the coordination center instead of in the air, sitting at a long console with 3 monitors in front of me. On one of them, wind maps spun slowly, showing shifting arrows and changing speeds. On another, a grid of cameras from across the mountains flickered in and out as the system cycled through each feed. The third displayed live numbers from remote towers: humidity, temperature, wind gusts. Even inside the concrete building, with the air conditioner humming above us, the air felt dry and tired. The fire had already been burning for days on the far side of the valley. Crews were out there chasing it along the ridges, building control lines, dropping water and retardant. It had become part of the background of our lives. Radio chatter about containment, maps with red lines creeping forward, smoke hanging over town like a second sky. Our job that morning was to make sure it stayed on its own side of the valley and didn't find a new path toward the city. I cycled through the camera feeds, matching each image in my head with the topography on the map. North Ridge, Old Sawmill, Narrow Canyon. Then I pulled up the view from the overlook above town. the same rocky platform where families like to grill and take pictures. The camera showed the familiar shape of the viewing rail, the informational signs, the sloping hillside that dropped away toward the road below. At first, everything looked normal. The trees were still, the sky hazy but calm. I was about to switch to the next feed when something thin and out of place slid into the edge of the image. A faint gray thread rose from the trees just to the right of the overlook. I leaned closer to the screen and zoomed in. The smoke was light but steady, coming from a patch of dry grass and brush near a bend in the trail. No flames yet, at least none that the camera could see. Just a quiet, constant column of smoke. Got something on the overlook. I called to the tech at the next station. He rolled over in his chair, squinting at my monitor. Probably a holdover, he said. Could be embers from a campfire, could be a new start. Better treat it like a new one. He was right. We'd seen this too many times. One little flare-up, left alone for an hour in the wrong conditions, could turn into a running fire. I radioed the nearest ground crew and gave them the coordinates. The captain on the other end sounded calm, almost bored. Copy that, he said. We're about 20 minutes out. We'll check it and report back. I marked the spot on the digital map and set a timer on my phone. Every few minutes, I flipped back to that camera feed. For a while, nothing changed. The thin column of smoke rose and drifted away. The numbers from the towers stayed inside the usual range, high but not alarming. Then the wind shifted. On the data screen, the arrow for the ridge above town jumped. Gusts increased, swinging around to blow straight up the slope from the valley. On the camera, the smoke suddenly thickened and tilted sideways, pressed against the hillside instead of rising into the sky. A moment later, a thin orange line flickered at the base of the trees. I keyed the radio again. Command, this is Brooke at coordination. That overlook start is picking up. Winds just shifted. You may want air on standby. The reply came back faster this time. Copy, Brooke. Keep eyes on it. I'll notify air operations. I didn't wait. I called the airbase directly. Jordan answered on the second ring. What V you got, he asked. New activity right above town, I said. Started small, but the wind is feeding it up the hill. Ground crews on the way, but if it gets into the brush line under the cliff, it'll run fast. Understood, he said. I'll start pre-flight. Get me updated wind and visibility as soon as you can. By the time I hung up, the fire on the screen had already changed shape. The orange line had become a jagged band, crawling through the scrub and into the lower branches of the trees. A gust pushed it sideways, and the flame leapt over the hiking path like it wasn't even there. I watched the numbers climb, gusts stronger, humidity lower, temperatures rising with the day. The ground crew checked in over the radio, saying they were close, but I could hear the strain behind their words. They knew what a bad position that slope could become if the fire broke loose. Minutes later, I handed my station to another tech and headed for the truck that would take me to the airbase. As we drove, the sky over the hills looked smeared and dirty, a dull brown instead of blue. Sirens echoed somewhere in the city below as more units repositioned. At the hangar, the usual routine had shifted into high gear. Mechanics moved fast around the helicopter, checking the winch, reviewing the lift systems, verifying fuel. Jordan stood near the nose with a clipboard, eyes narrowed toward the ridge line. Winds are ugly, he said when I walked up, but we've flown in worse. You think this start can cross the slope? It already has, I told him. It jumped the trail before I left the center. If it gets to the rock face, it'll climb right toward the cliff. We were airborne not long after. From above, the scene was worse than the camera had shown. The fire had run up the hillside in a broken, hungry line, licking through the trees and brush. The ground crew trucks were parked on the narrow access road, forced to back off as burning branches fell near them. Jordan kept us just above the main smoke layer, circling to get a full view of the slope. The flames moved uphill like they had a destination in mind, heading straight toward the steeper ground near the ridge. As we passed over one of the lower ridges, I saw movement below. A small group of deer burst out from the smoky edge of the forest, leaping over fallen logs and weaves of blackened shrubs. Farther along, a fox ran along a rocky band, hugging the stones as if trying to stay between the fire and the drop. They were tiny shapes against the gray and orange, but they pulled my focus away from the equipment and numbers and back to what we were really flying over. Fires pushing toward the cliffs, Jordan said into the headset. There's not much ground between the tree line and the drop. We banked again, following the path of the flames. That was when I saw it. Just below the upper edge of the burn, on a narrow stone shelf jutting out from the cliff, something dark moved. At first I thought it was another rock, blackened by smoke. Then it shifted its weight. I zoomed in with the tablet camera, hands suddenly tight around the frame. A bear. Alone on that ledge, nowhere to go. Above him a wall of advancing fire. Below him open air and stone. My throat went dry. "I've got a large animal trapped on the ridge," I said into the radio. Single bear, stuck on a rock shelf with fire closing in from above. No visible escape route. Marking coordinates now. I tagged the exact spot on the digital map and sent the data back to command. Jordan made another slow pass, so I could be sure. The bear paced a few steps one way, then the other, hemmed in by the cliff and the heat. Once, he lifted his head toward the sound of our rotors, nose testing the air. There was nothing we could do for him in that moment. We were there to map the fire and support the ground crews, and the smoke and wind made any low hover near the cliff too dangerous. But as we turned back toward base, I kept my eyes on that ledge as long as I could. By the time the ridge disappeared behind the smoke, I had already decided one thing. If there was any way to reach that bear, we were going to try. By morning, the base camp looked like a moving hive. Trucks came and went in a haze of dust, generators rumbled, and the air smelled of smoke and coffee. The fire had already pushed north overnight, forcing crews to redraw every line on the map. I walked through the rows of tents toward the command trailer, still hearing the roar of the flames in my head from the last flight. The image of that bear on the ledge hadn't left me since. Inside, the command room was dim, filled with the glow of monitors and the smell of melted plastic from radios that had overheated. Maps covered the tables, sections of the valley marked with colored ribbons, red for active fire, blue for control lines, yellow for critical zones. Captain Reeves was hunched over one of them, a pencil between his teeth. He looked up as I entered. "Morning, Brooke," he said. "You're early." "I barely slept," I admitted. "We saw something on the ridge yesterday. A bear. He's trapped between the fire line and the cliff. If the flames shift east, he's done." Reeves exhaled, straightening the pencil. "Show me where." I pointed at the coordinates I'd marked on the digital tablet. He leaned closer, tracing the contour lines with his finger. "That's rough terrain. No ground access. Too steep for vehicles." "Exactly," I said. "Only way in is air. But we can't drop water. He's right under the ledge. The wash would kill him." Reeves didn't hesitate. "Then we plan a lift. Safe for the team and the animal." He turned toward his assistant. "Call Wildlife Services. Get me Dr. Haley Grant. She's our vet consultant for large mammals. Tell her to bring sedation protocols." Within an hour, Haley arrived in a dust-covered SUV, her hair tied back, uniform streaked with ash from another rescue. I'd worked with her once before. Calm under pressure, no unnecessary talk. She carried a metal case in one hand and a folder of notes in the other. "You're the one who saw him?" she asked me. "Yeah," I said. "Big male, brown coat, maybe 400 pounds. Looks exhausted. There's no cover up there, no water. He won't last long." She nodded and opened her case. Inside were vials, syringes, and a laminated chart. "I'll prep a sedative mix. Light enough to calm him, but not enough to risk respiratory collapse. You'll need to hit him from about 10 feet, ideally on the shoulder. Once it kicks in, you'll have 5 minutes to secure him before he wakes or before the heat gets worse." Reeves leaned over the table. "And what about extraction?" Haley turned to me. "Do you have a lift net?" "We do," I said. "Standard cargo mesh, rated for 600 pounds. We'll double the straps and anchor it through the winch harness. Jordan's already tuning the lift engine for stability in turbulence." "Good," she said. "Just don't try to fight him if he's half awake. Move slowly, no eye contact." They read that as a challenge. The team moved like a machine. While Haley measured and labeled doses, the mechanics tested the winch system twice, then a third time for luck. I went over every strap, every hook, feeling the tension through my gloves. The fire's rumble echoed faintly even here, miles from the front line. The sky was stained orange at the edges, and fine ash drifted down like dust from a ceiling. Outside, crews continued their separate battles. I saw bulldozers carving new containment trenches and tankers circling overhead, dropping bright red retardant along the ridges. The sound of aircraft engines never stopped. It wasn't chaos. It was a rhythm everyone knew by heart. Back at the helipad, Jordan stood near the chopper, helmet under his arm. Fuel's topped, hydraulics clear. Visibility's about 70%, but dropping. He glanced at the horizon, where smoke was beginning to roll in thicker waves. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I can be," I said, strapping on my harness. Haley climbed in behind me, securing her gear case to the side rail. "Let's get him before that line jumps the ridge." We lifted off with a roar, the rotors scattering ash like snow. The base shrank beneath us, rows of tents disappearing into haze. Reeves' voice crackled over the radio. "Air 1, fire behavior updated. You've got approximately 10 minutes before the eastern flank reaches the cliff. After that, visibility's 0. Jordan's reply was steady, almost too calm. "Copy that. We're en route." I looked ahead, toward the glowing horizon where the mountain was already bleeding fire. Somewhere out there, that bear was still standing on the same ledge, waiting. And for the first time since the blaze began, this mission felt like more than firefighting. It felt personal. The helicopter shook as we neared the ridge, the world shrinking to rotors, fire, and smoke. Jordan fought the crosswinds, keeping us steady beside the cliff. Below, the bear paced on a narrow ledge while flames crept closer, glowing against the rock. Haley leaned forward, calm but urgent. "He's exhausted. Move slow. Let him see you first." I clipped into the descent line. "How long can you hold?" I asked. 30 seconds, Jordan said. "Then we drift." I nodded and stepped off the skid into the hot wind. The bear roared, eyes wild, smoke swirling around him. 10 feet, Haley said. "Take the shot." I aimed the sedative rifle, hit the shoulder, and backed off. He staggered, breathing hard, then sank to the ground. "He's under," Haley confirmed. "You've got 4 minutes." Ray lowered the net. Smoke burned my eyes as we rolled it beneath him. His fur was scorched, paws cracked. "Sorry it took this long," I muttered, locking the straps. "Fire's right on you," Jordan warned. Sparks flew as the ledge started to burn. "Lifting," Ray said. The winch groaned as we rose, dragging the heavy load into the air. The ledge vanished below, swallowed by fire. "Torque warning," Jordan shouted. "She's heavy." Alarms shrieked. The smell of burnt metal filled the cabin. "Brake temps red," Ray yelled. "If it locks, we lose him." "Hold on," Jordan said, voice tight. "Clearings ahead, 1 shot." The helicopter tilted, straining upward. Through the haze, a pale opening appeared. I gripped the cable, watching the bear sway in the net. The alarms faded one by one as we cleared the fire line. We were still flying, and he was still alive. The helicopter touched down harder than any of us wanted. The skid slammed into the grass, and the whole frame jolted before settling with a groan. Jordan killed the throttle, and the rotors slowed, but the alarms were still chirping in the cockpit. The smell of burning metal lingered even after the engines went quiet. Ray was already unhooking the winch. He shouted something I barely heard over the ringing in my ears. When I turned, I saw the bear's net being lowered onto the clearing, dust swirling around it. Haley jumped out before the blades had fully stopped, sprinting toward the mesh with her case in hand. I unclipped my harness and followed her. "Careful," she said, crouching by the bear's head. "He's still under, but the sedative's wearing off. We need to keep him cool." Ray dragged a tarp over for shade, while Haley checked his breathing and pulse. I saw her hand hover near his ribs for a few seconds. Then she gave a small nod. "Still strong," she said. "He's tougher than I thought." The ground crew brought buckets of water from a portable tank. We poured them slowly over his back and paws. Steam rose from his fur where the heat had baked into him. I wiped soot from his muzzle with the edge of my sleeve. The air around us was thick with smoke and sweat, but for the first time in hours, it was quiet. Jordan climbed out of the cockpit, his face pale under a layer of ash. "Hydraulics are cooked," he said to me. "Winch brakes nearly seized." When we dropped altitude, one cable was glowing red. Another minute, and we'd have lost it. He opened a side panel to show me. A section of the main brake line was blackened, the insulation half melted. I stared at it in disbelief. We'd been flying on borrowed time. Haley called us over. "He's dehydrated, a little burned on the paws and chest, but otherwise stable. We'll move him to the field trailer for fluids, then on to the rehab center once he's steady." She looked at me. "You did good, Dylan." He wouldn't have lasted another hour on that ridge. I nodded, but the adrenaline had already drained out of me, leaving a heavy ache behind. Just glad we got there when we did. Within the hour, the bear was on a stretcher inside a transport cage. The rotors of another helicopter thundered nearby, ready to lift him to the wildlife center 20 miles away. I watched as the doors closed and the crew gave the all-clear. For a moment, I just stood there, staring after the departing machine, the wind from its blades whipping through the grass. The next few days blurred together. News crews came and went, talking about containment percentages and evacuation updates. From above, the valley looked like a patchwork of black and brown scars, smoke curling in slow columns from what used to be forest. I saw deer tracks along the ash lines, coyote prints near the creek. Life was already moving back in. At the operations tent, reports stacked higher every day: fire perimeter, water usage, rescue counts. We'd recovered owls, foxes, even a mountain lion cub with singed whiskers. Each one had its own story, but none hit me like that bear. A week later, Haley found me near the refueling station. She had dirt on her uniform and a tired smile. "He made it," she said simply. "The burns are healing. No lung damage. He's eating again." I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time since that flight. "That's the best thing I've heard all week." She handed me a small photo, grainy, taken on a phone. The bear was lying on fresh straw, and 4-line taped to his leg, eyes half open. "Give him a couple of weeks," she said. "Then we'll bring him home." When the day came, we met at dawn. The air was cooler, washed clean after the first rain in weeks. The rehab truck rolled up the forest road and stopped near a clearing not far from where we'd lifted him out. The hills were still charred, but streaks of green had started to break through the ash. Haley and I opened the rear gate. The bear hesitated inside the crate, blinking at the sunlight. Then he stepped out, heavy but sure-footed, sniffing the damp air. For a moment, he looked straight at us, calm, unafraid, and then turned toward the trees. His massive shoulders shifted as he moved uphill, disappearing into the pines. No one spoke. The only sound was the distant rush of the stream, swollen from the rain. Later that week, I flew recon over the burn zone again. The same ridge, the same ledge, but everything was different. The rocks were still black, but tiny green shoots had already forced their way through the cracks. Life was coming back. I hovered there for a minute, remembering how certain I'd been that the bear had no chance, that we were too late. But he'd proved us wrong. Sometimes disaster starts with something small, a spark, a moment of carelessness. And sometimes survival starts the same way, with one choice, one person who refuses to let go. As I turned the helicopter toward home, I looked down at the ridge one last time. In that quiet stretch of forest, reborn from fire, I felt the weight of what we'd saved, and how close it had been to being lost forever.